At night, we went to Mass, but we also sat down, and every one of us wrote a letter to each other. I wrote a letter to each person on the group. Paul wrote a letter to each person. Each of us wrote a letter to each person. And then we met and we gave them to each other. I've got them all in here. I'd love to read them to you, but I can't do that. But they were powerful because people were really owning up to relationships, failures and successes. It was a powerful time for us. So that was really, really good. While we were there, we decided to split up and travel. Paul can tell you where he went. It was an interesting place. I'll just tell you where I went. I went with Kathy. We went to Mopti, which was in Mali. We're going to go across the border into Mali. It took us 26 hours with 9 police checks. I wrote that down here. And we get to Mopti, and where are we going to stay? Of course, I went to the Catholic Church, and their guest house was full. So it was a hotel down by the river, the Niger River. So we were down, and there was a boat, a floating hotel. So Kathy and I got into this hotel, and we stayed there for a night, and we really wanted to go to Dogon territory. The Dogon tribe used to be cliff dwellers, and everybody said, you got to go to the Dogons, you got to go to the Dogons. So this was our tourist thing. So we took a trotro, or whatever they call them, and went to the nearest town. And as soon as we got out, we were besieged by guides. And we said, we don't need a guide, we'll just walk. And they said, somebody came up to us and said, you need a guide. You cannot go without a guide. So we took the youngest one, was a young lad, and he said, I'll take you to my village. So we did, we went with him, and we get there, just Kathy and I. And it was fantastic, all mud houses. And he said, now you're going to be staying at this house here. You're going to sleep on the roof. You go up that ladder and you sleep on the roof. Oh, we had bought sleeping bags with us and things, and we did, and that's when it was fantastic. The next day he took us up to the cliffs, and we saw all these old houses up in the caves in the cliff. They weren't living in them anymore, they were storing things in them. In fact, they were burying people in them. It was a cemetery, and a fantastic experience. And then the next night he took us over, and we up on the way up the cliffs, and we stayed in a village above it. And then the next day down into another village, and we went into the marketplace. It was fantastic. And first of all, we had to see the chief of the village, and we had to pay him some money. And we said, can we take pictures? And he says, yes, you can take pictures. So my biggest memory is I took a picture of this one man and his camel, and he screamed at me and told me, you can't do that. And so I'm talking to my guy, the guy was still with us, and I said, he spoke enough English, I could explain to him, and tell him that we paid the chief, and the chief said we could take pictures. So he explained this to him, and the guy said, okay. We learned a lot. Then Kathy and I, there was a group of Americans, 3 American women, and they were heading back to Burkina also, so we got with them, and we got in a taxi, chocho or whatever, and he wouldn't leave until it was full, but we needed to get going. So we told him that we will pay for the missing people, because we got to go. He said, but if we stop and pick anybody up along the way, that money goes to us. He agreed. And we did pick up 2 people, and he did give us the money. So we get to the border of Ouagadougou, we get across, and we take a bus. The one thing I should tell you is those 3 Americans were the the epitome of the ugly American. They were drinking all the time. They brought their own stuff with them. We just wanted to get off and get away from them. We had a hard time getting rid of them when they wanted to go with us. That's when we headed out to Ghana. And I didn't tell you about entering Ghana. What a difference. Every time we'd gone to a new country, we'd have our luggage looked through, we'd be sitting there for hours, and passport problems, and they wanted a bribe, and we get to Ghana, and the guard says, the border control guy says, "You are welcome. Come in. We want you here." Oh my God, we couldn't believe it. We just felt so welcome. And that was all through Ghana. Mind you, it was English speaking, and that made a huge difference. We could talk to people, we could talk to everybody. And so that's when we went down and slept in the lousy hotel and found Father Clement. Well, I'll make it quickly here so that not to go too long. He introduced us to Dr. David. And some of you know Dr. David, I know. Dr. David, here's his story, and he told us his story. When Ghana was first a colony, the British pumped lots of money into it. And they built roads and hospitals, and education was free. Schools, they built schools, and teachers were well paid. And then the British say, now it's time for you to pay back your crops. We want your crops. And your biggest crop is cocoa, chocolate. And so they converted a lot of their fields from food into cocoa. And they more than doubled the production of cocoa to get this money from England to pay for the things that England was no longer paying for. And when you double the amount of cocoa that's available, the price goes down. Half. They weren't making any more money. So it was a disaster. The schools had a hard time getting teachers. The hospitals had to start charging. They'd been free up to this point. Dr. Abdullah, Dr. David, he said, we had a brand new 6-story hospital in Tamale, and it had everything, but all of a sudden we had no money because people couldn't afford to come there. We had to send people outside to go to the bathroom. We couldn't have running water. People couldn't come. They couldn't pay. So he began to have a clinic under a tree. And people would line up ahead of time. One day a week he'd be out there. And he'd treat them free out there. And he realized, this is what I have to do. So he got in touch with some German missionaries who had some, leads on how to get German funding, relief work. And he got some funding, and he built a hospital. But he built it out in the bush, near where all these villages were. And then he went to every village. He said, now look, I'm going to treat your people free at the hospital. But you, if you want to come here, you have to come here and build a roundhouse. And that's where your people from your village will stay while they're at the hospital. That'll be their hospital room. And you have to supply somebody to feed them and look after them because I don't have enough money for that. And we gowned up and we were in the operating room and he's doing an operation for a hernia. And he doesn't lose, and the kind of anesthetic knock somebody out. What do you call that? He didn't knock him off. He used local anesthetics just around where he's going to be operating, because he didn't have the operation, he didn't have all the equipment. So I'm in there and I'm watching him slice open, pull out these intestines. That's it. I had it and throw up. I've had it. So he gave me another job. I'm sorting medicines. He got all these donated medicines coming in from Germany, all written in German, but he had labeled where to put things in German, and I could read the labels. So my job was to go through these cartons and things. Well, Paul and I were working there at the hospital. Others were working with his wife. And she's at home with a big cauldron making food, a huge amount of food. And then they put that cauldron in the back of the pickup truck. And then they drive around town and they feed all the homeless people living on the streets. They called them the lunatics, but I don't think they meant as much. To us, that's really bad, but it's kind of normal for them. But, these are all these people living on the streets. So our people were going out. So I moved there and started doing that. And you saw a picture of me leaning over feeding one of the people on the streets there. Paul, that was fantastic. And so that was really, really good. And then we heard about TICS, the Tamale Institute of Cross-Cultural Studies, where they prepare missionaries to work with people who live in the area, the Gombas. They teach the language, they teach the culture. So we went there. And we didn't have time to take the whole course, or we couldn't afford to take the whole course. But we asked if we could take a week, and they said, yes, we're starting our course in a week, but would you like to live in a village for a week first? Oh, yeah, let's do it. We don't speak the Gomba. So I ended up in a village called, and some of you have probably been in it, Tempe Kukua. That ring a bell for anybody? I was in Tempe Kukua by myself. We were all out in different places. And there was one person in the village who spoke English. His name was Charles. So I was staying in Charles's compound. And he was fantastic. He took me around and introduced me to all the people in the village. And I met the chief. He said, now when you meet the chief, you have to get down on your knees because you can never have your head above the head of the chief. So you sit down and, just stay lower. So that was good. And as we went around, he introduced me to several people. He says, this is my father, and these are different people. And the second time he says, this is my father, but it's a different person. So I asked him later, you introduced me to 2 people as your father. Oh, he says, yes, of course. I said, what's that mean? Oh, in Ghana, all of the brothers of your father are your father. So all of the father who is my birth father, one who gave, birth, who generated me, all his brothers are my father. And all of my wife's, the women, all of their mother's sisters are their mother. Oh my God. Huge families. And the kids get moved from mother to father to father to father, and depending on what school you're going to go to or what you're going to do, you can go and live with a different father, different mother. What a powerful experience. That was really good. And I learned another lesson. He lent me his bike and I rode around for a while and I came back and I said, oh, that was really good. And he says, well, did you know that you really insulted so-and-so? I said, what? Yes, you passed him on the road. He was coming into the village when you were going out. I said, how did I insult him? He says, you waved at him with your left hand. That's the hand you wipe your bum with. You're rubbing shit in his face. You can't do that. It's an insult. You always greet somebody with your right hand. I didn't know that. But we learn all these things. You know. I want to tell you one more thing. We met the bishop, Peter Derry. He spoke English. He'd been in Canada. He studied at St. Alex in Nova Scotia, St. Francis Xavier. He studied co-ops and he studied credit unions because that's what his people needed. He was fantastic. He sat down with us and he talked to us for 4 hours. And I said, you got all these missionaries here, what about local pastors? He says, oh, I'm so happy the missionaries are here because our local pastors, they need to learn so much from them. And he says, and one thing, he says, well, I live in this bishop's house, and the problem is, because of our kinship laws here, anybody who's related to me can come and live with me. That's our way. And if that happened, my house would be full all the time. And so I had to tell him, no, we can't live by that rule anymore here because, So he was able to help us understand, how difficult things were and how missionaries. He liked the missionaries. He was so happy with them, but he also liked his young priests like Clement and that. But he was so good. Okay, where am I now? We went back to text for that course, and I was going to read you some of the things that we learned there. But again, it took us through all the culture, the do's and the don'ts. And I've learned quite a few of those just from living in the village, as you can tell. Don't use this. Anyway. So then we were heading out. And we began to do presentations. With those wonderful pictures that you saw that Paul had. We did slideshows. We did 30 slideshows. We did them at St. Mike's High School, we did them at St. Mike, we did them in other schools, we did them for groups, we did them in churches, we did them in various cities. We traveled to Ottawa, we traveled all over the place. We got back out west and we did more out there. Wow. So I'm going to stop there because those were the first beginning trips. And they were powerful, and the whole program took off from that. So I'll just leave it at that. And you can ask any questions you want to do. And so we stopped there, and we heard their story, quite a little thing. Not just from Mexico, from Central America and other places. And the guy who was running it said to us, we've got 3 guys here who want to go to Canada. Can they get on the bus with you and go? My first reaction was, sure! Of course! So, consensus decision making, we sat with the group, and we had a lawyer, a young person from Vancouver who was studying law. And he says, that's illegal to transport them. If we get caught, we're committing a crime. And then there's some of us who said, but it's not a crime. They're calling it a crime, but it isn't. We're helping these people to get free. So that was one of really a hard consensus decision making. But it was quite clear that we couldn't do it. the group was not ready to do it. So we didn't do it. I'm so sad. That was really important. Another consensus decision on that same trip. Again, the bus broke down. And this time it was stalling. You're driving along and it stalls while you're driving. That's okay, except that the brakes don't work when it's stalling. You know, they're not manual brakes, they're electric or something. And the group our lawyer said, well, we can't go. We have to stay here and let's get fixed. We have to send back to Canada to get the part that fixes it. So, round and round. And Sister Pat was beautiful. She spoke up and she said, have you noticed all the other buses here? They're all dilapidated and held together with tape. We're making our judgment here out of First Nations way of white English ways of doing things. We're in Mexico. We should go. We all put our thumbs up and we went. And it stalled out a few more times, but never in a dangerous place. And then we had one person in our group going back to Toronto because he was going to become a Brazilian, and he had to do that he had to go to this retreat, and they would pay his way back, and then they'd pay his way to fly back down to Mexico again. He had to go. And we said, okay, get this part for us. So I phoned to Canada, and we got the part ordered, and we brought the part back 2 weeks later. But by that time we were stationed in families and working in orphanages and doing all kinds of stuff. So anyway, good.